start us off with the classic intro?
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Cory.
And I'm Isaac.
And we're here to talk about movies.
We're here in different cities.
Oh, yeah. We should mention that, I guess. We are going to be talking about Dr. Sleep from across the state of Washington. I don't know if that...
The vast state of Washington.
Yeah, I don't know if that has to do with the themes of the movie at all.
Just as director Mike Flanagan attempts to bridge the gap between the Shining novel and the film adaptation, we will bridge the gap between the east and west sides of Washington state and their myriad of political and cultural differences. Not to mention the 280 miles that lay between us.
Yes, just like the 280 miles that lied between the original The Shining, the movie, and The Shining, the book.
Exactly. So I actually think thematically there is a lot of rich material to be mined here.
Yes.
In
fact, let's not talk about the book at all. Let's just talk about ourselves.
Let's actually make this a totally biographical podcast episode.
I was born in a log cabin 50 years. Okay, never mind.
But anyway, we are recording this podcast remotely from each other for the first time. So if there's any hitches, please forgive us. I think we got a solid setup, though. It seems to be working right now.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be just fine.
So we're going to be talking about Dr. Sleep, which is a 2019 movie that just came out based on the book Dr. Sleep by American writer Stephen King.
Exactly. Well put, Cory. It almost sounds like you're reading off a Wikipedia page or
something. No. Not at all.
We would never
use that as our only resource.
Right. That would be such a crutch. We know everything off the top of our heads. No, but before we dive into Dr. Sleep, I would like to get in the habit of plugging ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
We are about movies. We have a blog and a podcast. You can find our blog over at aboutmoviesci.wordpress.com and links to our podcast on all the major platforms on that site. You can also hit us up on social media at aboutmoviesci. We're everywhere. We're all over your social media. You, in all likelihood, have already seen us. All your friends have been posting and talking about us. So just click on our profile link next time it comes up on your newsfeed.
Yes, we are so famous now that we're typically getting double-digit likes on our Instagram page for every single photo. So pretty impressive if you ask me.
I think we got 9 on one recent one, but that was just one of them. Mostly
Yikes.
We are definitely firmly in the double digits.
Mostly firmly.
Okay, I'm done with my spiel, Cory. You can go back on your setting the stage.
I'll start off by saying, if you have not already, you could preface this by listening to another podcast episode that we did recently that is entitled King of Adaptation.
Also, that episode was another experiment of sorts. It's our only 2-part episode. We have a tendency to experiment when it comes to discussing Stephen King film adaptations.
Yes, one of the most experimental writers of all time. So in that episode, of course, we discussed The Shining because it is arguably the best Stephen King adaptation that there is. Maybe we said tied with Carrie, or maybe second place to Carrie. Was it only the second adaptation?
It was the second film adaptation, yeah.
Okay, yes. The first 2 could not be topped.
I don't know if you could really make a serious argument for any of the adaptations after the first 2 surpassing either of them. I think that the trend continues with Dr. Sleep. I think we can safely say, not that anyone was expecting it to surpass The Shining.
Definitely.
All right, that wraps up our discussion. So thank you all for tuning in. No, I'm just kidding. We're just getting started here.
Yeah.
Another experimental aspect of this week's episode is the fact that we really haven't talked to each other about this movie yet. Usually we precede our recording sessions with a conversation where we discuss some of the things we'd like to talk about and get an idea of where each other stands so that when we record, we can flow into each topic more naturally and just have an idea of directions that we can take the discussion. But here we're both going in blank with regard to what the other person thinks of the movie, with a couple of small exceptions.
I think that'll be nice, actually, because it will be a true discussion, because we don't know what we're going to talk about yet, and it'll feel more natural and give us more surprise to banter back and forth with.
I hope so.
Now we can start, I believe, talking about Dr. Sleep. Well, one thing I want to preface with that we discussed a little bit in our previous Stephen King podcast episode was, if you're listening to this and have watched a lot of Stephen King adaptations, you know about Stephen King, or even just know about Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, you are aware of the vast creative differences that came up between the novel The Shining, turning that a few years later into the movie The Shining. So much so that it kind of started a bit of a feud between King and Kubrick. Stephen King was not happy, I believe, with the way the movie turned out. And probably, I would guess, that it's just because of how Stanley Kubrick changed the details of the book in order to make it fit his own vision.
Right. And I hope that someday we're going to be treated to a biopic about the feud between King and Kubrick, mostly because it could be called King versus Kubrick, which just has a great ring to it. Even better, I think, than Ford versus Ferrari.
Yeah, that's true. And twice as prolific as well.
Also, though, just the gravity of the two artists on either side of that argument, right? You have the master of contemporary American horror and the master of contemporary American film at the time.
Indeed.
Basically duking it out about the best way to tell this story.
And taken separately, these instances of artwork by these two individuals both turned out very high quality. Whether The Shining, the book, is telling the best story or whether Kubrick is telling the best story, it's actually kind of irrelevant because they both are so different and both so high quality in different ways that it's almost like it created two completely separate entities. Probably the most fascinating part about the whole thing is that neither was a huge artistic failure. I think we mentioned that initially Kubrick did not meet the best critical reviews, but obviously you know now, if you're listening to this podcast, that it has since drawn a huge following and is considered a classic, amazing movie.
You could have a whole discussion, I think, about the contrast between the film and the book and which one gets more things right, quote unquote. That's not what we're here to do today. But I do think it is important to pose the question and answer the question. Does Dr. Sleep serve as a sequel to The Shining, the book, or The Shining, the movie? What's the answer to that question, Corey?
Both. It is a sequel to both, and sort of reconciles the story of both Dr. Sleep, the novel, and Dr. Sleep, the cinematic universe, or the Shining cinematic universe, I guess you could say. Whether he succeeded on that, I think, is what we will discuss in detail coming up, but that was definitely something that Mike Flanagan was attempting, not to completely disregard the events of Kubrick's The Shining or to completely change the Shining universe to fit the Kubrick Shining. This is getting kind of confusing, but yeah, you're getting what I'm saying.
You could view that attempt at reconciliation as being ambitious. It's
yes.
very difficult, right, to reconcile two works of art where the artists fundamentally disagreed about so many aspects of them, and they are just so very different, both in terms of where their narratives end up going and just their tones and purposes, right, the feelings and ideas that they end up prioritizing. But you could also view it as kind of a meek decision, right? Like not wanting to step on anyone's toes kind of decision. There was a hesitation to commit to one route or the other. Is it possible to effectively fuse these two works, or is any attempt to do so just going to be fundamentally muddled and feel like it just sort of has feet in both camps. See what I'm saying?
Yes, and in my opinion, I think it does come across a little bit as having feet in both camps. It was an ambitious choice that did not quite successfully get all the way there. I don't know what you thought on that, but to me, I saw that choice coming across as a bit of a visual divide, right? Because Stanley Kubrick had such a distinct craft for what came out of The Shining. You know, when his inspirations in Dr. Sleep come up, it's so obvious and kind of takes you out of it a bit.
Yeah. Well, Cory, I'm sorry to say that we might not have the most rigorous debate about this one because I completely agree with you. I found most of the Kubrick homages to be very distracting. I went into the film excited for that aspect of it and not really that interested in any other aspect of it, to be entirely honest, because the trailers sold it as a sequel to The Shining, which, all right, unnecessary, but like obviously I'm still going to get hyped for it because I am susceptible to modern marketing. But the other side of the story that they sold just looked sort of like a campy, not that scary yarn about this weird cult hunting down kids who have The Shining, right?
Yeah.
So I went into it mostly excited for its aspect as a sequel to The Shining. I knew that Dr. Sleep, the novel, was somewhat tenuously connected to The Shining. I haven't read the novel, but I've read about it. I understand that it is mostly a continuation of Danny Torrance's character. He briefly revisits the Overlook Hotel in the novel, but
yeah, I mean,
it's mostly a standalone story, right?
Exactly. And the other thing is that the Overlook doesn't exist anymore in the literary universe of The Shining.
Oh, right. Yeah, there's a discrepancy.
Yes. And
so the whole tagline of Dr. Sleep, the movie, is Dare to Go Back to the Overlook, which is something that in the book, Dr. Sleep, was never even part of the equation for why Stephen King wrote that novel, because there was nowhere for Danny Torrance to go back to.
Even though he has to go back there to the site where the Overlook Hotel stood, in the book, it's less that he's going back to conquer his own demons and more to kind of reconcile with his dad and to kill the final, battle the final girl. Because I think they just happened to be there or something, right? It was related. I don't know the exact details of the story.
Novel?
In the novel, yes.
Okay, I was going to ask that. Does the climax take place there in the novel?
Yes, it does, but it's completely different, obviously, because there is no Overlook Hotel. So there's no aspect of the ghosts coming back. There are the ghosts of his dad. His dad helps him at the end because his dad turned out to be a good guy. He was the one that blew up the hotel in the book.
Right.
The Shining.
That's another fundamental difference between the book and the movie.
So
right, is the redemption of Jack Torrance.
Yeah, and he then gets to make peace with that because he sees his father again, and his father helps him reconcile this situation, and he feels like he gets a final goodbye. And the other big spoiler difference, we've already been spoiling things, so, long past that, but the other big difference is that he doesn't die. Danny does not die at the end. Yes, so the ending itself, that really came across as all in the movie The Shining. Yeah, the fact that the Overlook Hotel was still there meant that an entirely different story and ending had to be taken place.
Here's the problem for me, though. The connections that Dr. Sleep, the film, has with Stanley Kubrick's Shining adaptation are mostly aesthetic, right? It recreates sequences from The Shining, the film.
Yes.
And obviously it uses that ominous score, the horn melody, to set the stage for the film, right? The film actually opens with that score. Goddamn, probably my favorite part of the whole movie, straight up, was the old Warner Bros. Logo with that score playing over it.
Yeah, they really captured something there. That was That was good.
And then it comes up like one other time, right when they're about to go to the Overlook, during this shot that recreates that iconic helicopter shot over the lake.
Yeah.
At the very beginning of The Shining. So
there were a couple times where I was like, is this a clip from the movie? Like, I could see it for like a millisecond. And then as they started repeating it over and over again, the recreated scenes, it became more and more obvious that it was a remade copy instead of just taken from the original movie.
Yeah, and it felt so cheap to me. The look-alike actors who just really didn't look that much alike. In the case of, I don't even know who it is who plays Jack Torrance in this film. Like,
no clue.
He like kind of looks like Jack Nicholson and has sort of the same hairstyle, but like not enough to actually sell himself as Jack Nicholson visually. And he also sounds nothing like Jack Nicholson. It's just like this total mismatch. I don't know how anyone thought that anyone would be happy with that portrayal of Jack Torrance.
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't even understand that it was his dad initially. It took me a minute to realize. You could tell it kind of resembled him, but it took a while to realize that it actually was him because it doesn't really look like him. It doesn't look like a recreated Jack Torrance. It looks like a guy who kind of looks like Jack Nicholson.
Kinda.
Yeah, exactly. Stress kind of.
Yeah, that's the problem. I think all of the aspects that connect to Kubrick's The Shining, it's like Flanagan made some sequences that kind of look like they could be out of The Shining or could be from a direct sequel to the Kubrick Shining, but that feel nothing like they are. Like, the tone is just completely off, right? The tone feels very much rooted in a Stephen King horror adventure-y tone.
Exactly.
Not at all in a cerebral Stanley Kubrick horror tone.
Yeah, honestly, all of the Kubrick-esque, core-shaking horror elements were just not present at all.
And instead it slaps the veneer of those elements on top of a story and a mood that do not fit those elements whatsoever. So that at the end, when all of the ghosts come back and assist Danny and sort of end up killing him, it is an homage, I guess, to the Kubrick Shining, but it just feels like a total misuse of all of the images that film used so effectively.
Yeah, and that became even more confusing in the end when Ewan McGregor enacted the ending of The Shining, the book, by blowing up the Overlook Hotel, right? Blowing up the boiler.
Mm-hmm.
So that just became even more confusing, what he was trying to accomplish or reference or pay homage to, since obviously that doesn't happen in the Dr. Sleep, the book.
Yeah, it was almost like it was an attempt to take the aesthetics of Kubrick and smooth them over with the continuity of King. And in doing so, I think Flanagan does a total disservice to Kubrick's work because it is just fundamentally different from King's. And
fundamentally different from Flanagan, right? He has never made something that was Kubrick-esque. That kind of surreal horror.
That's a great point. I think his best film, his best work so far, Gerald's Game, in my opinion, was another King adaptation. And that one worked exceptionally well because it leaned into that Kingian, oh man, we need a better adjective form of King.
Yeah.
Psychological horror, right? Like you've described it as like the everyday person encountering these inexplicable supernatural phenomenon that frighten them and lead to some kind of personal journey of growth and understanding.
Yes.
That,
and
often has a happy ending even in the King books.
What was clear from Gerald's Game is that he was very into the project and he changed the story, the plot devices of Gerald's Game to make it better. It's kind of the opposite of what happened with Dr. Sleep. It was like the parts that he made for himself in that adaptation stage, going from interpretation to your own art. He made those elements better, and the ones that he directly stole from Stephen King were not very good. Like I mentioned on our blog that the ending of Gerald's Game is very weird and tonally off, but it also is directly copying what happened in the book.
Yeah,
it was like what
not that
he
way.
did himself was great in Gerald's Game, right? He is a very good director and has a very clear vision for what he wanted. And because we got lost in Dr. Sleep between the King, Kubrick, and Flanagan elements, the vision was not as clear of what was going on.
Totally agree. And I think that lack of clarity is a lot of the reason why the film totally bombed financially. I don't know if you heard about this. It only made like $12 million in its opening weekend. It was expected to
Dr.
make
Sleep
anywhere
did?
from 25 to 30. Yeah, it bombed,
I didn't realize
which is interesting. The Shining also bombed financially, at least in terms of its theatrical release.
Yeah.
That said, I did quite enjoy some elements of the movie. I don't know if that is relatable for you.
It is. I felt like the parts that he drew directly from Stephen King, the Kingian elements, worked really well in the movie. And it's probably just because he already had a handle on how to create that from Gerald's Game. He is clearly a fan. You know, he wrote the screenplays for both of these movies and has an idea of how to capture what we were just talking about, those real human characters in these kind of situations. And when we got to see real human characters interacting with a fantastic and creepy universe, it worked well. It worked well. And then when he sewed on the surreal, it wasn't even surreal, when he just sewed on direct references to Stanley Kubrick, it was less compelling.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if you had cut out the connections to Kubrick's The Shining, you would have been left with a solidly entertaining horror-themed adventure.
Exactly. It's hard to call it. It's hard to call it a true horror when it's mostly just a thrilling drama, a horror-themed drama, like you said.
Yeah, no. So I agree. I mean, I really enjoyed the kitschy, immortal, sort of vampire-ish cult. I think the scenes featuring those characters were honestly my favorite in the entire film. I thought Rebecca Ferguson was magnificent and just hammed it up in a wonderfully entertaining way. She was menacing, and she just really sold me on her character, I guess, which easily could have come across as being a super ridiculous comic booky villain almost. And in a lot of ways she was, but she just owned it.
Yeah. Those over-the-top elements definitely strike me as a King-related thing, right? The villains, if there are real villains, like human villains, are usually very flamboyant in their evilness. The one that comes to mind is the dude from The Stand. The villain of The Stand is basically like the epitome of all evil and darkness, and just everything evil and dark just draws around him. So those kind of things are classic King, and she was able to capture that really well, that over the top, but still human, right? There is some serious fear and indulgence and greed, a lot of great evil but human traits that were portrayed really well.
How did you feel about the portrayal of the Danny Torrance character by Ewan McGregor?
I thought it was good. I like Ewan McGregor. Honestly, I hadn't even thought about it.
That's, I think, actually a bit telling. I agree. He was solid. I like Ewan. He's a likable dude, and he does well in this with the material that he's given. But I thought that he was underserved. I felt that for a movie called Dr. Sleep, which is a pseudonym given to him by a hospice patient for his uncanny ability to comfort people through his psychic powers who are about to die, that it just wasn't that much about him. There were so many other elements being juggled, some of which ended up paying off. Like, I thought the Abra character worked just fine, played by Kylie Curran in a solidly not cringy child performance.
Yeah, definitely.
Her whole arc, it made sense, maybe a little predictable, but she also had some entertainingly dark edges to her where you were like, is she kind of sadistic? I thought she was a fun character. There were some other side elements that didn't play as well, like the recruiting of Snakebite Andy to the cult at the beginning, which positions her as a major player in the story.
Yeah, that was strange. That was very strange.
So odd. I am really baffled by that. Like, she's just treated as another throwaway cult member every scene after that.
And another frustrating thing, when you explain it this way, it'll become even more frustrating. She, like you said, is positioned as a major character and then is inessential for the rest of the film until the very end of her life, when she tells Billy, Dan's friend, to kill himself. And this character did not die in the book. Another strange choice. That was just kind of another.
Is it really? That was just horrible. His death was just horrible.
Yeah, inessential.
No, I agree. It just felt inessential. It felt like it maybe could have been essential if we had witnessed the ramifications of it for Danny, but we just didn't. Right? We didn't see him really cope with the death of this person that lifted him out of destitute circumstances and gave him a second lease on life. We just
it's
see
hard,
him move on very quickly.
It's hard to portray a person that is so inward and alone. All his interactions with Abra and even the little bit of time he gets with Billy were good, but for the majority of what's going on in Dr. Sleep, it's all his thoughts, dealing with the demons of his past, so to speak, dealing with all the weird, crazy stuff that has happened in his life that he's had to self-medicate in order to get past. These are all things that he's dealing with mentally. We don't get to hear his thoughts, so, we're left a lot of it to generic interpretations like, his life sucks and he's drinking, he's an alcoholic, just like his dad was, shocking. And then he's getting better now, and we kind of have to guess on what he's going through on all this. And at the end, after Billy dies in the movie, we get to see him grab a bottle of alcohol and almost drink it and then smash it on the ground. So we have to just assume what's going on in his head. We didn't get to feel along with him, and I guess they didn't want to include any more of the psychological ramifications of what's going on in an already 2.5-hour movie.
I guess they decided not to, and instead decided to lean into the more superficially apparent and entertaining aspects, like the whole vampire cult, how they function and how they interact with each other, which was interesting and entertaining in a hokey, pulpy kind of way.
And focusing also on the ending, which drew a lot of time, probably more than it needed to.
We actually talked about this topic in our King of Adaptation episode, the dilemma of filmmakers who are adapting a literary work that dives a lot into the heads of the characters, how they have to either come up with a way to represent those inner dialogues on screen in a way that works and isn't cheap or annoying like voiceover narration.
Yeah.
Or they have to choose to portray them visually or through actions that the character takes, or they have to just not explore that aspect of the character, right? They just have to take it in a different direction and engage you some other way. Here, I think the approach taken was that latter one, or at least the parts of it that worked were the parts that embraced the latter approach and just don't really focus all that much on Danny's inner turmoil and instead lean into the fantastical and adventurous thrilling elements of the story, right?
Yeah, I can think of only 3 scenes where we get to see Danny alone with his thoughts, so to speak, and kind of dealing with the ramifications, or not even alone with his thoughts, but getting to express his thoughts visually or in a Alcoholics Anonymous speech. So
did you think that those instances worked?
I guess they illuminated what was going on in his head, but not to a great extent, right? It didn't seem to impact the rest of the movie, which, if you include those, they really need to feel integrated, They need to not feel like, oh, now we're getting the inner thoughts of the character. Oh, and now we're going back on the adventure.
I totally agree. His inner transformation did not feel well integrated into the outward conflicts that were happening, right? Like what you said, the part where he smashes the bottle of bourbon on the ground instead of drinking it. I get that is intended as the turning point, clearly that is his lowest point psychologically, and then he smashes the bourbon bottle, and oh, cool, he is now past his lowest point psychologically, and he's gonna be on an upward swing for the rest of the film. And he is for like the rest of the film, except when he gets corrupted by the ghosts, right? And he ends up dying, but like psychologically speaking, I think that is his lowest point, and it's so unearned and shallow. We just don't get to witness his inner struggle. Yeah, he's really sad because his best friend just died, and it feels like the film, instead of exploring that in a way that's meaningful, just opts instead to cheaply gloss over his entire experience of grief and his struggle with alcoholism and the sins of his father in this one smashing of a bourbon bottle.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't go over.
I think you just have to chalk it up to, you know, an over-ambition on Flanagan's part, because it did make clear that he was trying to say something different than the book. It seemed more about Danny overcoming trauma, I guess, in his life, rather than, I've never read the book, so I don't know the exact theme.
You weren't supposed to tell him that, dude.
Oh, okay, sorry.
It sounded like you had, man.
Okay. I just
I'm
know
kidding.
about things. Anyway, so I don't know the exact theme. I would guess that it's less about overcoming trauma and more about kind of a redemption story. It's about a man taking hold of his new life, basically, and not succumbing to the sins of his past.
One important element that you're, I think, really close to hitting on is the question of whether Danny is obliged to, from his own position in life that he reaches and his understanding of The Shining, pass that knowledge on to someone else in the same way that Dick Halloran helped Danny out in the original Shining, both in the book and in the movie. Dick actually comes at him and directly tells him, right, you have a responsibility to do this. Like, you have to help someone else. You owe it to the world and to, other people who have been through what you've been through to do this. I think that is a point of tension that was intended to be very key to the development of Danny Torrance's character, and I don't think it worked. We just didn't get to know him well enough to understand. Like, in the book, Danny Torrance is a character. In the movie, Danny Torrance is not really a character. He's just a little kid that rides around on his tricycle and says creepy things sometimes, and has some important things to do in terms of driving the narrative forward. Yeah. But Kubrick's film is not about the characters, right? It's about the feelings. Whereas King's book is all about the characters.
Right.
And I think that Dr. Sleep, the book, and the narrative of the movie too, were all about the characters. But in the film, there's just, like you said, there's just too much going on to pay adequate attention to that aspect and give it the time that it would have needed to, develop in a way that felt natural or earned.
I think the changed choices that they made, killing off more people and making it a harder struggle through to the end in the movie, were supposed to be making up for that lack of diving into the characters' heads, right? Making the audience feel like they're going through the same toll that's going on. Like, you're going through the difficult journey with them in the movie. And that's what is used in the replace of understanding what the characters are feeling and thinking. So, one thing in the book, at the end, right, like I said, he survives, Danny. He beats Rose the Hat and kills everyone in the cult group and reconciled his relationship with his father. He also, at the end, is still continuing on with his life. He is not only passing on the knowledge. Remind me what they talk about in the end when he's in her bedroom, the spirit of Dan.
Oh, it's that she is not supposed to hide her shine, right? Basically,
yes.
He told her earlier, keep this hidden and people will come and get you if you, let this out into the world. And then he's like, I was wrong. You need to share this with the people you love and be honest, I guess, about who you are is sort of the general idea.
I think the change made there was that it was less about The Shining, dealing with that, and more about what you can succumb to as a human dealing with these situations, right? Like his alcoholism, his violence, they show that at the beginning of the movie, but they don't really reference those at the end as much, except for in that one throwing the bottle scene. And I think that's more of the focus of him giving that up at the end and continuing his sweet and idyllic life, his simple and helpful life, I guess. Kind of heroic in a very like small way, you know what I mean?
Right.
And instead,
act local.
And instead they just blow that up, I think, at the end, literally blow it up in the movie by making him into the classic troubled hero.
Like Protector ultimately redeems himself, even though he dies in the process.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
then his spirit still kind of carries on. He's a martyr. He's remembered.
And of course, they couldn't have him reconcile with his father, who in The Shining, the movie, is just a clearly psychotic man who is not really redeemable in any way. They couldn't have him reconcile with his father in the movie, so they just had his mother at the end instead.
You've used enough references now to the cinematic story that was told that this is somehow supposed to be like a meaningful end for the Danny Torrance character.
Yeah, the ending it confused it. It confused what we had seen before a little bit. We know why he did it. It was to firmly plant the ending in the Kubrick sequel universe.
And to connect the two continuities.
Yeah, reconcile the
Basically
differences between the book and movie.
So that we can have Dr. Awake in 2060.
Yeah.
I'm proud of that one.
That's going to be, the little girl is going to be the next Doctor.
Yeah, we just got an endless cycle now that we can mine for, at least $12 million each opening weekend.
They'll just keep having someone ghostwrite under Stephen King's name, and he'll never die.
Well, isn't his son writing?
Yeah, he has a couple sons that I think write. I know Joe Hill, his older son, has written a lot of books.
And has even worked in some King continuity. So hopefully we can just get a dynasty going here and keep the whole tradition alive forever. The world will shine.
That one we watched, the In the Tall Grass, was actually a collaboration with his son, Joe Hill.
Solid story underlying it, even if the
movie
film
was shite.
Shite. Aye, it's shite.
Yeah. Well, Ewan McGregor, he's like Scottish, right? Or something.
Oh, yeah, or something. One of those things. Yeah.
Issues.
Didn't notice, though. He pulls off a mean American accent.
I feel like every UK actor can do an American accent.
Yeah. Even Southern accents. Was it you who was saying that?
Yeah, I was, for the trailer for Just Mercy.
Remarkable. No one who is American can pull off any kind of English accent in quite the same way. Yeah, that's just... We're still being conquered.
Did you see...
ways.
So, what's the dude from Dexter's name?
Michael C. Hall.
Yeah, did you see that he produced and starred in a show that was set somewhere in the British Isles, and he has a British accent for no reason?
Yeah. You told me that. It's really funny. The question is it a good British accent?
No, it's not. It's very cringy. It doesn't sound right. You know how you watch British TV shows and eventually it just starts to sound normal, like they're just talking normally.
As if they aren't actually just freaks of nature.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course they are.
They are, yes. Yeah, anyway, it's just cringy because it's obviously not real, and that feeling does not go away. Although I didn't finish the show, to be fair. I watched the trailer.
That basically counts.
Yeah, exactly.
And you read the Wikipedia summary of Dr. Sleep, so you're pretty much can cross both of those off the bucket list, right?
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. I didn't even read the Wikipedia summary of the Dr. Sleep book, so
it's not very illuminating, but there were other synopses that were more helpful.
You know more than I do. Regardless of what you did, it worked. Is there anything else we'd like to touch upon as far as Dr. Sleep goes? I think we hit upon everything. It's an attempt to please a lot of different people and to fuse a couple of really different works of art together into one. And unsurprisingly, it does not do so successfully.
I don't dislike Mike Flanagan because of this.
Right, but he's not a magician.
Nothing that he's made so far has been perfect, in my opinion.
No, I agree. I mean, his eyes were bigger than his stomach in this case.
I don't know if that analogy totally works, but I vibe.
It works enough, man. All right, let me have it.
Okay.
He successfully adapts a lot of the King elements and unsuccessfully fuses them with some Kubrick elements. Actually, we can probably just cut everything else out of this podcast and just
it's just going
have
to
it be
jump
that
to
one
that
sentence.
all of a sudden.
If you're going to see it, you're probably going to see it regardless. And hopefully you've already seen it, or else you've had it completely spoiled for you if you're one of the 14 people in the United States who went to see it on opening weekend.
Yeah, they were all in the same
Roasted.
theater as us. They only had one
Yeah,
showing.
probably so. And it was at AMC Woodland.
It has, so on Rotten Tomatoes, it has 91% audience score. And that's like over 2,500 votes. So
Kind of surprised. I would have thought that it would have been not a crowd pleaser at all. It's like long, slow, and I don't see how it could please anyone who is a fan of the Kubrick version. Maybe it's proving very resonant with King fans.
I guess so.
There's a lot of them out there, I guess.
People are into nostalgia. However quality it is, they're into it.
And hey, at least on top of its fun, pulpy, adventure thriller elements, this film also gave us the gift of a character named Crow Daddy, who actually maybe we should thank Stephen King for that.
Yes, Crow Daddy saved the day for sure. That dude was pretty good. He was kind of like the understated half of the leaders of whatever the group is called. What are they called? Do you remember?
No.
Have to look it up, but I'm lazy.
Immortal Creepers.
Immortal Creepers, that's their exact name.
No, yeah, I agree. I liked his weird sexual chemistry with Rebecca Ferguson's character and how that kind of underscored the strange sexuality of the entire cult group.
Yeah,
How
there
they would
was
all,
there was a like ritualistic satanic orgy-ish element to whenever they would eat the steam of the other people who had shining powers.
I wonder if that is partially an homage to the underlying sexuality of the vampire archetype, which it seems like is the closest comparison that you can draw here, even though they don't suck blood or turn into bats.
But they do the most essential element, which is like feast on another, hunt humans and eat them, basically.
Right, for immortal life.
Immortal life, exactly.
I would have preferred if there were more vampire cult orgies in this film. I just have to put it out there.
The few that they had, like 5 or so, too few.
Yeah.
Too few.
10 minimum for me to give a movie 3 stars.
So, before we leave, we know that your favorite Mike Flanagan project is Gerald's Game. So what would you put as your second favorite?
Gotta put Haunting of Hill House at number 2 for me. Probably competes with Gerald's Game for number 1 just because there's a real dearth of consistently quality horror series, and it is one of them. It does fluctuate a bit. There are definite highlights, but real solid still nonetheless, start to finish. Love its old school creepy vibes, and I think that it manages to tie story and scares together to a successful extent, or a more successful extent than most narrative-driven horror does.
So what about second in terms of movie?
Just the movies,
excluding
so number 1,
Haunting of
Gerald's
Hill House.
Game. At number 2, I think I would actually put Oculus.
Really? Okay. Interesting.
I thought Oculus was a really clever, nasty good time. I didn't even know who Mike Flanagan was when I saw Oculus, and learned later that he was the one that made it. And I just remember at the time being like, wow, I thought that was going to be a cheap horror movie, and it kind of was in some ways, but it was just so well executed. You can see that there was some talent behind it. Devilishly good time. So I'm going to put that at number 2 behind Gerald's Game. What do you put at number 2
probably
behind
Hush,
it?
just because it seemed more consistent in maintaining its mood. It definitely wasn't nearly as freaky as Oculus, but maintained a harsh vibe of feeling like you're being hunted, basically.
No, agreed. I think Hush was a lean, mean movie.
Whereas Oculus
I'll give it a close
is just
number
like
3.
Sometimes very compelling, and sometimes feeling like it's a stretch to the end, and also the ending makes you question yourself for watching the movie because it's just so brutal.
It is. It's a pretty gross one, but
yes,
and I also will always remember convincing our good friend Adrian before we started the movie that it was a documentary about the making of the Oculus Rift virtual reality headset. which he actually bought. He was a little confused, granted, when it began at an auction for a mirror, but he actually bought it until the first scare, which is like a demon girl coming out of the shadows, and he lost his shit. It was so funny.
That's
funny.
Great. That's really good.
Have you seen Before I Wake or Ouija?
I have
Origin
not.
of Evil?
So yeah, we're drawing from the same small pool of his films and projects.
I need to watch Before I Wake. It's on Netflix.
It doesn't have good reviews though, does it?
It doesn't have great reviews. It has alright reviews. It has like 60 something on Rotten Tomatoes. 61.
Not bad.
So divisive. And then Ouija, that's a surprising one. The original absolutely panned and looked absolutely awful. And then the second one looked really bad to me in the trailers, but got really solid reviews.
Yeah,
and it's directed by Mike Flanagan, so those are both on my list. But I guess I can't go further than ranking those three.
I'd be down to watch Ouija or Origin of Evil.
Yeah, I'd be down. Maybe we can come out with a definitive Mike Flanagan ranking list. You know what I was realizing, actually? I was on Letterboxd, actually it was yesterday, and I was realizing I have seen the entire filmographies of very few directors. In fact, the only one I could find definitively, aside from easy ones like Jordan Peele, Ari Aster, like new ones, is
Robert
Christopher
Eggers.
Nolan.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen all of Christopher Nolan's films. Like, even Tarantino, I haven't seen Death Proof.
No, yeah,
like
I'm in the
Bong
same
Joon-ho, I still haven't seen his first movie. There's a lot who I just like am missing, just a couple. Or who just are so prolific, like Soderbergh, Spielberg, people like that.
Yeah.
So I need to, I think, complete more filmography. That's going to be my new project. So if you want to embark on that with me.
Yeah, we're probably going to have to watch some bad ones, but I'm okay with it.
It's fun, though.
It is.
Get the full picture of a filmmaker. All right, well, thank you, everyone, for listening. Again, you can find more quality content on our blog about moviesci.wordpress.com. Earlier this week, Cory put out a solid little write-up on a new Hulu horror film, part of the Into the Dark series. Check that out if you're looking for more horror, if Dr. Sleep wasn't scary enough for you.
And
I'm not sure Pilgrim is, but
it's entertaining, I guess you could say.
It is entertaining.
Isaac soon is going to probably be writing about Bong Joon-ho because he's been obsessively watching his filmography and is close to finishing it. So I'm excited to see all of your thoughts on all the movies because from the ones I've seen, he's pretty solid, pretty 100%.
I'm thinking that'll be coming later this week because I have two more. Got to watch Mother and then Barking Dogs Never Bite, and then I'll be done. That's coming soon, everybody. And then on social media, we're about Movies CI. So give us a like, follow, retweet all the things those kids are doing these days. And please give us a follow on the blog and on Podbean as well. Those really help and let us keep you informed about our new content that we're putting out on the regular.
Thanks for making it to the end. We appreciate your listening. Hope you had a good one.
You made it.
Yeah, comment, tell us what you thought, give us some feedback, and start a dialogue about movies because that's what we love.
With Cory and Isaac. All right, Cory, what magical tune do you have to
I don't
play
know
us
yet.
off with this time?
We'll find out after these messages.
Here it comes, everybody.
Okay, goodbye.